Snow came down the way old memories do, quietly at first, then all at once, until the world felt smaller and harder to breathe in. I remember the evening Elias Crow walked into our town, because winter had already claimed it. The light was thin and blue, stretched tight across the street, like fragile glass. His boots left careful marks in the snow, as if he did not wish to offend the ground. At his side moved a German shepherd, ash-colored and dignified, every step measured, eyes awake to everything. The dog's breath rose in pale clouds. The man's did not rush. No one spoke to him. We watched from behind windows fogged with warmth and judgment, measuring him in the way small towns do, by his silence, by the wear of his coat, by the way he kept his hands empty and visible. Someone whispered drifter. Someone else said trouble. The snow carried those words and laid them gently at his feet. Elias did not seem to notice. Or perhaps he noticed everything and chose not to react. He walked the length of Main Street as though listening for something buried beneath it, something only he and the dog could hear. When the wind cut sharper, he loosened his scarf and wrapped it once around the shepherd's neck instead. The dog accepted it without protest, tail still, posture calm. That small act told me more about the man than any introduction ever could. He found shelter where the town had forgotten to look, a collapsed tool shed behind the old mill, half swallowed by snowdrifts and neglect. He cleared a space with his hands, slow and methodical, until the ground showed through. From his pack came a single blanket, which he folded twice and placed beneath the dog before sitting himself on the cold wood. Only after Ash was settled did Elias eat, breaking a piece of bread in half and offering the larger portion to the animal. Hunger, I would later learn, was something he had learned to negotiate with patience. By morning, everyone knew about him. Mrs. Penfield claimed she'd seen scars on the dog and decided that meant violence. Someone said the man didn't talk because he was hiding something. In winter, rumors spread faster than warmth. They wrapped themselves around him long before the sun could. The diner was the first place he stepped into where the cold loosened its grip. The bell above the door rang, sharp as a warning, and every conversation slowed. Elias stood there a moment, snow melting off his shoulders, Ash waiting obediently outside the glass, eyes never leaving his handler. The smell of coffee and fried onions hung heavy in the air, comforting and unforgiving all at once. Mara Whitlock was working the counter that day. She noticed things others missed. The way Elias chose the corner booth, back to the wall, eyes scanning exits before sitting. The way his hands trembled once before stilling. She brought him soup without asking what he wanted, the steam rising between them like a truce. "On the house," she said quietly. He looked at her then. His eyes were not hard, as some would later claim, but tired in a way that suggested long conversations with regret. He nodded once. That was all. Outside, Ash sat in the snow like a statue carved from loyalty. When a truck backfired down the street, the dog stiffened but did not move, gaze fixed on the diner door. Elias paused mid-spoonful, listening. When nothing followed, his shoulders eased by a fraction. Mara noticed that too. The badge came for him before the kindness could take root. Sheriff Calderboone arrived just before dusk, his shadow stretching longer than the streetlights. Deputy Holt Rayner followed, eager and loud, boots kicking slush onto the sidewalk where Ash sat. The dog did not growl at first. He simply stood, positioning himself closer to Elias, a quiet barrier of muscle and intent. "Well now," Boone said, voice smooth with practiced authority. "We don't get many strangers this time of year." Elias rose slowly, movements deliberate, as though sudden motion might shatter something fragile inside him. He said nothing. Silence, in that moment, felt like defiance. Rayner laughed and nudged the dog with his boot. "Looks mean," he said. "Probably dangerous." Ash's lips curled, just enough to show restraint rather than threat. Elias dropped to one knee instantly, resting a hand on the dog's chest. The growl stopped. The control in that single gesture rippled through the watching crowd, unnoticed but undeniable. "You passing through?" Boone pressed. Elias shook his head once. "Then you'll answer when spoken to." A shove followed. Not hard enough to draw blood, just enough to remind everyone watching who held power here. Elias staggered, caught himself, and stayed standing. He did not raise his hands. He did not lower his eyes. The snow seemed to absorb the sound of the moment, leaving only shame behind. No one intervened. Windows glowed warm. The diner door stayed shut. That night, the shed felt smaller. The cold seeped in through every crack, carrying the echo of laughter Elias pretended not to hear. He sat with his back against the wall, Ash curled tight against him, sharing heat, sharing silence. The dog slept lightly, ears twitching at every sound. Elias did not sleep at all. Fragments moved behind his eyes, unwelcome, uninvited. He pressed his forehead to Ash's and breathed until the shaking stopped. "Stay," he whispered, the word breaking the long fast of his voice. The dog exhaled, steady and sure, as if answering. Mara came after closing, wrapped in a coat too thin for the night. She carried a small paper bag and no questions. Ash watched her approach, measuring intent. When she knelt and offered her hand, he sniffed it once and allowed her closer. Trust earned inch by inch. They sat together in the shed doorway, the town behind them and the dark stretching out ahead. Mara did not apologize for what had happened. She did not offer explanations. She simply shared the quiet. And in that quiet Elias felt something loosen, a knot he had been carrying so long it felt like part of him. The snow kept falling. The town kept whispering. And somewhere beneath it all, a truth waited, patient as winter itself, for the moment it would no longer remain buried. By the third morning, the snow had learned the shape of Elias Crow. It curved around his boots where he stood outside the shed, breathing slowly, Ash seated at his heel, like a promise kept. The town had learned his shape too, though it pretended otherwise, doors closing quicker, voices lowering when he passed, eyes turning away with practiced ease. Shame is easiest when it is shared. The accusation came the way such things always do, wrapped in certainty and spoken loud enough to become truth before it could be questioned. Deputy Rayner found him near the diner, a pair of gloves held up like evidence. Boone, watching from the patrol car, with a look that suggested this had been decided long ago. Someone said they were stolen. Someone else nodded. The gloves were dropped into the snow at Elias's feet, as though they had always belonged there. Elias did not reach for them. He stood very still, eyes forward, Ash's body subtly shifting closer to his leg. The dog sensed the change in the air before any of us did, the tightening that comes just before something breaks. Rayner's voice rose, sharp and hungry. He stepped too close. Ash growled then, not loud, not wild, but disciplined, a warning shaped by years of obedience and restraint. Elias placed a hand on the dog's neck, grounding them both. The growl ceased. The silence that followed felt heavier than sound. "Control your animal," Boone said, stepping out of the car at last. "I am," Elias replied. The word startled the street. It was not loud, but it carried weight, worn smooth by long use. Boone smiled, thin and humorless, and struck Elias across the mouth. Snow caught the blood before it could fall. Mara was there. I remember that clearly. Her hands clenched in her apron, her face pale, with something like recognition. She started forward, then stopped, trapped between fear and decency. The town watched itself watch. When Rayner lifted his baton toward Ash, something ancient and deliberate unfolded. Elias moved, not with rage, but with clarity. He stepped into the space between dog and blow, catching the baton mid-swing, twisting just enough. Rayner cried out as his grip failed him. Boone reached for his weapon, and in that moment the street seemed to hold its breath. There was no flurry, no spectacle, only precision. Elias disarmed Boone with an economy of motion that spoke of training too deep to announce itself. The sheriff fell hard into the snow, stunned more by disbelief than impact. Ash stood firm, unmoving, eyes locked, waiting for command that never needed to come. A pair of metal tags slipped from Elias's coat and landed face up in the white. A man in the crowd bent, squinted, then straightened slowly. His voice shook when he spoke the name, the rank, the truth that suddenly rearranged the world. The whispers changed shape. What had once been suspicion softened into awe, then curdled into regret. Boone was handcuffed by men who had once laughed at his jokes. Rayner would not meet anyone's eyes. Elias retrieved his tags and tucked them away, the gesture gentle, private. He knelt then, not in submission but in care, checking Ash's flank where the baton had grazed him. The dog leaned into his touch, unhurt, unbroken. After, the town did not know what to do with itself. Apologies hovered, unspoken. Doors opened that had been closed. The cold seemed less sharp, though winter still ruled the land. Reverend Hale offered a room, warm and quiet. Elias accepted for Ash's sake, nodding once, as he always did. Mara brought coffee the next morning. They drank it by the window, snow melting into slow rivulets on the glass. Their hands brushed, accidental and electric, and neither pulled away. Nothing was promised. Everything was possible. Elias stayed, not because he was welcomed, but because staying felt like choosing life again. Ash slept deeply at last, dreams twitching through his paws. The town learned slowly how to look without judging, how to listen without demanding words. And if you are listening now, let me tell you this. Strength does not always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives quietly, wrapped in patience and loyalty, waiting for the moment it must stand. If this whispered tale found a place in you, stay with us. Subscribe, and walk a little farther into the stories that remind us who we are.